Thank you. Can you hear me, Christine?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Um, Thanks for having me. Yeah, I was these are like the best calls I get. Keith, I imagine was like, "Oh man, I got to call him at 8 a.m. and ask him to do this, and I don't know what he's doing today or where he even is in the country." But I was, those are absolute the best calls. I wanted to actually, Christine, as she introduced herself, I wanted to give you a little bit of background of kind of why I'm here tonight and then talk about step eight. And some of you might have heard me speak before, but I'll tell you a little bit about my background and my story. So, February 14th, 2009, I entered Caron Treatment Centers in Warnersville, Pennsylvania. I was 24. I was terribly broken and I was sick. I was really, really, really sick. I was probably about 121 pounds at that period of time. I'm about 5'11", so I was not a well individual. Spent a great 30 days there. I thought I was all better, and I had the world waiting for me so I could come and tackle everything that was going on, relationships, families, amends, everything, as a lot of us do in early recovery with 30 days sober. We just think we can tackle the world. I spent just about 120 days sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous before I relapsed. My relapse, as you have probably heard over and over again, and maybe have experienced yourself, the next year was, tenfold worse than what I've experienced in my life previous to that. And on right before about actually September 2nd of 2010, I was arrested. My uncle had called the police on me. I had been stealing from my family, and I was arrested, which I never thought was even plausible or even ever going to happen to me. And I called I ended up in jail, and my mom called a wonderful individual named Tom Ditzler, who sadly is no longer with us. And he said, "I will show up. I will call the judge. I will call anyone that I need to call, and I will get you into treatment. But you have to do everything that I tell you you need to do. There is no no, there is no maybe, there is just yes." And I agreed. Um, and I was, a little bit probably of it was, I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to deal with the consequences of my addiction yet. I was trying to kind of bypass anything I could do. And there was definitely a piece of me that wanted sobriety as well, and recognized just the few months of sobriety that I had were some of the best times that I can remember. So I went into Caron for stabilization in Pennsylvania, went down to Florida. I spent a little over a year in Florida, in treatment, sober living, outpatient, before returning back to Pennsylvania. And by the grace of God, since September 3rd of 2010, I've been sober. And it's been everything that they've promised it would be. I wanted to start off there because my true journey into the steps and into recovery, started in South Florida. It started in as a 24-year-old, really young adult child, kind of coming into the world of like just life. When when step when I think about step eight is made a list of people we had harmed and been willing to make amends to all of them. Um, I go back into what step eight was for me then and what step eight is for me now. And I'll talk a little bit about that because my first time going through the steps, and if you're in the process of going through the steps, the first or maybe even the second time, um, it it can feel very daunting. I had this amazing sponsor. The sponsor, I mean, he's certainly saved my life, and he's a great Caron alumni as well. And I'm not going to share his story, but um, he he just really wanted me to walk through it, keep my feet moving, and being able to do the work that is necessary. Because for him, and as I know it today, by doing the work of the step, by walking through those steps, you're given recovery. By doing that work, you are then given the promises of recovery. And you have to continue to move your feet because at least for me and what I've seen with other individuals, either that I've sponsored myself or within my sponsee family, is that if you stop moving your feet, it's like being on an escalator. You start moving backward very quickly. So for when I was introduced to the steps and started to work my step program, it was imperative that I kept moving and I kept going step by step, with earnest and diligency and honesty and all of those things, but just to keep moving. So I kind of broke this up into a couple of different ways. So I think the when you start thinking about made a list of people that we had harmed and been willing to make amends to them all, I think of it as responsibility. First and foremost, I think about like me taking accountability and responsibility for the damages that I have that has happened in my active addiction, and me showing up and giving that space to exist, and me taking ownership of that. Um, I think about step eight as well as like it's not there's some action in it, but people tend to want to jump to step nine, which is the amends process. They're like, okay, like let's make a list, and like the action is making the list, but then people immediately start talking about, well, is this going to do more harm than good, or how am I going to make this amends? And I just go slow down, slow down. That's not a part of that. That is a part of the process, but that's not where we're at right now. We have to live within the step that we're working. And that step eight is just about making that list and being able to be honest and earnest and prepare and develop that list. So making the list itself is really about taking everyone, or if they're past, if they're current, if they're on the other side of the country, if you don't know them, if you just know them by a first name, it's everything. Because when we're making the list, when it comes to step eight, it's not, again, it's not about the amends process. It's not whether we can or cannot. It's that, are we willing? That strong word of willing. Am I willing to be able to show up, put it on the list, get it out in the universe, and have a conversation with my sponsor about it? Being able to develop the list and being able to just be like, again, create that responsibility within self. And to be able to also start to work on the honest self-reflection. So I love the term rigorous honesty or like emotional sobriety. Those two kind of go hand in hand. And through the step process, we get those actually identified in some steps when you talk about rigorous honesty. But I think it plays itself out over the process of the step work that we do. And that rigorous honesty and that self-reflection is built into every single step that we walk through. And step eight has that built directly into it. As you're kind of building out that list, as you're reflecting on kind of what has been and kind of what the damage looks like to the individuals in my life. It was really interesting. I did a step eight, and I'm going through and putting people on, and I'm working through my sponsor on it, and he said, "What about you? Are you on it?" And I was like, no, like I'm not on it. Like this is about other people. He said, no, this isn't about other people. You're a part of this. You did great damage to yourself. And you need to start to understand that you're gonna have to walk through a forgiveness and a process when it comes to you. And the first time, and that kind of where I reference kind of the first time going through the steps and subsequent times after, and then working with other people in this, is that, that first time I wasn't there. Like I didn't know what forgiveness of self looked like. I didn't know what like how to even tackle that. but it also wasn't going to limit me from continuing to move forward in my step process. Because as we evolve in recovery, as our honesty grows, as the rigorousness to our program grows, as the relief from guilt, moving forward in our lives and trying to like repair some of the damage that has, that notion of like self-reflection and removing some of those barriers of self-forgiveness, which is a lot of just guilt and anger and internally kind of focused on self, that grows out of that too. And that's why it's really important when we think about the step processes. This is an evolving process, and it's also a never-ending process. That's why we have maintenance steps in 10, 11, and 12. I mean, this is a process that moves forward. So I think that, the making the list and the self-reflection and self-honesty and rigorous honesty is really, really critical. And then the willingness, I mean, it's in the step itself. Are you willing? Because I'll tell you what, I mean, when I started to build that list out, there were some people on there that I was like, I don't want to talk to those people. Or I don't want to talk to my uncle, or I don't want to, like, there's too much damage, there's too much pain. There were other people on that list that I couldn't even imagine being able to reach out to them because I was so removed from them. But it didn't matter about the process. The process was getting them down, being willing, if at all possible, and then being able to take action in step 9. So it's really about that willingness and character and kind of that fortitude to move forward. Of course, there's like, fear in all of that. As I'm like, I think that's why a lot of people just jump to step 9 from step 8. There's a lot of fear and apprehension around that of what that'll look like or what that will be. And I just like to just always just as we're kind of moving and continuing to move forward to be able to slow that down as well. Recognizing that it's progress, not perfection. I can get stuck in that and kind of just start spinning my heels on it. With working with individuals on the flip side of my own recovery process, when working with individuals in the step process, I oftentimes see that you get stuck on a step. There's a step that just seemingly can't be pushed through. And that might happen after relapse and relapse and relapse. And then someone's continuously is struggling on step 4 or step 9. And what's the barrier to that? And sometimes it's really just, the guilt and the shame. And then some of it is just like, I want to make sure that I get it right. I'm not one of the, like, I've worked with a lot of people where like it's like it has to be right. I'm not one of those individuals. I'm just like, tell me to keep moving, I'm going to keep moving. But if you're sitting in there in that perfectionism and you need it to be right, and it's got to be perfect, that can be a hindrance to being able to move forward too. So when I think about sponsorship, it's really the sponsor's responsibility, oftentimes to help kind of keep people moving forward in that. Give the guiding hand. That's why this is a sponsorship program. This is why people aren't, recommended to do step work individually or by themselves, because you learn and you gain strength from someone, and you're able to walk these steps with someone that's already been able to do it. And that fusion of empathy and understanding and recognition that what your past is no different than the other pasts of individual that have walked the dire straits that is addiction, the damage that is addiction, the consequences that come, and the damage into relationships that come with addiction. Um, the you know eh, people always talk about kind of avoiding that harm piece of things. I try to just push it off, even though yeah, oftentimes I talk to individuals during step 8 about step 9. It is kind of a lead way to it. They are definitely linked steps. When you think about like historic 12-step programs, like way, way, way back at the origin of step programs, and they actually had less steps than we do now. We kind of broke them out, and step 8 and step 9 are fused together. There's a function of the function of step 8 is step 9. That's the lead up to it. So as much as, I try to keep kind of moving and kind of keep the steps independent of each other, I recognize that there's some overlap there, and there's just some need to kind of talk with someone through that. And it was helpful for me. It was helpful for me because I had a lot of angst and apprehension towards walking down, doing step 9. So when I walked into step 8 and I'm writing down and I'm like, wait, you're telling me I'm going to do what to who? Like, I got to go address this with this person. And to be able to have my sponsor go, you know what? No, not right now. Let's get it down on paper. Let's take step 9. Let's talk about it. Let's work through this together. Because you're not going to be able to, make an amends like you think with potentially with, your grandmother that's passed and you were stealing medicine from her in her nursing home. You're probably not going to be able to do the amends that you necessarily want to, but you can do an amends process that will be in her honor and what that'll look like. So to being able to really talk that through was very, very helpful for me, and also relieved some of that fear that I had going through that process. And some of them were in step, as a response to step 8 and step 9, were really, really hard conversations to have with people that really needed to have a conversation and me to show up and um, just say I'm here and I'm willing to do anything for this relationship because it's that important to me. And those conversations were always the hardest, and oftentimes had the best outcomes because they're the relationships that I have stronger relationships with those people than any other people in my life. So it's an amazing process, and step 8 is the process to kind of move into that amends planning, and it's such a critical, almost like infrastructure piece to kind of be able to build, to be able to walk into that amends with individuals that you love and the damage that's been done. So that's what I have on step 8. But happy to stick around and talk with you guys. It seemed like a fantastic group tonight, very chatty and great welcome. So I would love to hear what y'all's experience has been and talk about step 8.
Thank you, Eric. Excuse me, I'm got a little bit of a thing in my throat, but it was really good to hear you. It's always so good to hear you. And you said so many great things. Tom has his hand up though, so I'm gonna just go ahead and jump right over right over to Tom. Save my questions for later. Hey Tom, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Christine. Hey, everybody. My name is Tom. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I'm also a Caron alum. I was at Caron in April of 2011. And I wanted to thank Eric. I mean, first of all, on short notice. And yeah, I do agree. You're an amazing speaker. Very clear. I really enjoyed it. Got a lot out of it. Really appreciate it. Agree with all of it. Just going to dance around it a little bit and just tell you a couple little things, little nuances of step 8 and how I experienced step 8. In addition to all the things that you said, I was taught that as I prepared that list and prepared to make an amends, part of the experience for me was to put myself in that other person's shoes. I was one of those addicts, alcoholics that just didn't have an ability to really see anything outside of self. I used to say that all my drinking and all my bad behavior, I was only hurting myself. And I really didn't have much of a capacity to understand how our behaviors are all intermingled and we're all intertwined and we all affect each other. So part of the experience for me was putting myself in another person's shoes and trying to experience what it felt like from their perspective. And that helped me in the process of actually making the amends. And it taught me a lot. It taught me to be a more empathetic person. I sort of developed an empathy muscle, if you will, as a result of doing that. And lastly, I guess preparing for, step 8 also taught me or allowed me to experience vulnerability. Again, I was one of those alcoholics that never wanted to be vulnerable, always needed to be in control. I thought I was. Realizing that I was going to step up and make amends, which was more than a simple "I'm sorry," knowing that I wasn't going to be able to control that outcome. In most cases, they went very well for me, but occasionally they didn't, and not being in control of that, taught me vulnerability and the role of vulnerability and the need to be vulnerable when it's the right thing to do. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate it, Eric. I really loved it. Thank you again. I love my Caron fam, and I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna partake in some wisdom. Thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Tom. Eric, anything?
No, I love my Karen fam too. I love it. No, I love it. I was like, I love you brought up vulnerability. I mean, we talk about vulnerability so much. It's like it's the crux of things. I remember the most vulnerable in the oh my God, the step process, and it's probably earlier on, man. But step 4 was brutal for me. And that vulnerability and taking kind of that rigorous approach to like the damage of my past and writing all that down and doing inventories and 4 and 5. I mean, it was that's the most vulnerable I think that the first time I went through, I think that's the most vulnerable I've ever been in my life. I don't know if I've ever been that vulnerable again. Because I mean it took a lot. So thanks for that. Yeah, vulnerability is definitely the crux of it.
Can I ask a question before I go to Moose, who I see has his hand up? Hi, Moose, but really quickly, with regards to that, like, and I think you mentioned it in your share, but when you do step 8, it doesn't necessarily, to your point, I think you said you don't need to make amends. You're not necessarily going to make amends to all the people that are on 8, right? So even people who by making the amends might do them harm, if it's going to do you harm as well, like that's something you work through with your sponsor. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's part of being vulnerable and thorough. Instead, like we don't I remember when I was doing my step 8, like my sponsor knew she's like, are you self-selecting some people off the list? Put them on the list and then we'll do it together. So could you just hit on that a little bit? Because I heard it in both of your.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that, kind of just highlighting that. I mean, you said it great. It is about the willingness and the honesty to be able to put all individuals on that list or anything, any even institution. I mean, like anything that you have directly harmed. And, the willingness to make amends to it doesn't mean that you are going to make amends to it. It doesn't mean that you or if there is more damage going to come out of it than good, then you have to work through that, but you have to work through that with your sponsor, because in my mind I can make up excuses why it's going to be more damaging than good to make an amends to someone. Like I can create that story and that narrative for myself, and I need someone to check, forgive my language, I need someone to check my bullshit at the door when I start to kind of get into my own head about how I should be running my life, and what should be done and what shouldn't be done. So, the plain answer of it. But yeah, no, you said it. You're spot on, Christine. It's a sponsorship process.
And it's always good for your sponsor to have a sponsor too. So if they don't know the answer, they can check with their sponsor.
My
That's how it
grand my
works.
gra my grand sponsor was I remember my grand sponsor pulling me aside. I think I was about 5 months sober, and he pulled me aside out of a meeting, and he goes, "I haven't seen you in a couple of days. You are not doing your step work, and you're trying to avoid seeing me and seeing your sponsor." And he was right on. And he had a very my grand sponsor had a very direct and pretty aggressive approach versus my sponsor, who was just like very kind and gentle. I needed both of them.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Hey, Moose, how are you?
Hey, CD, I'm doing well. How are you? My name is Moose. I'm an alcoholic. Eric, great job, dude. Um, Short notice or not, I know factually my recovery journey is better from this day forward from hearing you speak for the first time. So for that, I'm grateful. Um, just phenomenal job. What I enjoyed, and this is why I shouldn't have had Christine go right before me because she was going to take my point. I knew this was going to happen, but you know, I'm not gonna hold it against you. But when you said, and you summed it up very, very well in like 2 sentences, man. It's not whether you can or you can't. It's the willingness. And I picture, and I have this list where it's like the can and I can't. I have those columns, right? And just because they're in the can't column is not exclusionary from you making that amends, right? And the way that you said it, it hit home with me because someone told me, you know, to make those columns. And my first thought immediately was if it's in the can't column, I'm free. Right. But it was a test, right? My sponsor has a way of doing these things and I've caught on to it now. But, you know, it was a test to see whether I'm trying to, you know, exclude, you know, by omission and, you know, whether it's a safety or they've passed or what have you. But there's no reason to have anyone on that can't because it's about the willingness, right? And the way that you sum that up hit home. And what I absolutely loved, and you know, maybe it's just tonight, maybe I'm in my feelings, but when you said, you know, did you put yourself on that list?
Mm.
Right. That was not something I was comfortable with doing. Right. And I pushed back a lot on multiple sponsors. Why or why not? Is the time right? Why can't I be on the can't list, you know? But yeah, there's no way around that. You got to get good with yourself before you can get good with others. Right? And yeah, just the way that you put it, it, it hit home, man. So thank you so much. I look forward to hearing you again and keep doing it on short notice, man. Because when it's short notice, you bring it. So great job, brother.
Thanks, Moose. It was good to hear from you. You said it differently than I did.
I had to
But it's
try really
beautiful how you
hard.
said it.
I had to try really hard to make it sound better, but it's
Mm,
not a competition.
it is not.
That self piece is so critical. It's so hard early. It's so hard early. I once you kind of unravel that selfishness and self-destructive behavior that we were living in with so long, and you kind of walk into like the shame and guilt that is, man, that's a painful place to be. And to then to like be like, okay, like I gotta work on like forgiving myself. I wasn't ready in the first year. I put myself there, but you know, on the direction of someone else. I wasn't gonna be doing that myself. But that, you know, that's something you gotta we work through. Time allows us to do those things.
Thanks, Eric. And you know, that's such a great point to Eric and Moose because we have a lot of families on here tonight. And the like act of self-forgiveness or the act of compassion for ourselves is really something I struggle with 7 years, 8 years later. And my disease likes to take me back into the self-pity, pick up the whip. Like it likes me there. Because and then I go back into my old, I'm not picking up a drink necessarily, but I'm going into my old behaviors. So I think, Eric, I appreciated too you saying that like even with the amount of time you have, you're still doing the same you're doing the same program. Um, that we have to be diligent to this. Mike, oh, Tina, I'll go to you after Mike. Mike, oh, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike. I'm an alcoholic.
And sorry guys, I stopped to hit pause when I get so interested in things.